I was researching this topic and typed Buddhist Tantra into Amazon. Hundreds of titles came up, only a small handful by actual Buddhist scholars. The rest? Relationship coaches, weekend workshop leaders, and New Age authors promising sacred sexuality and tantric enlightenment. Meanwhile, authentic Tibetan Buddhist teachers often avoid using the word Tantra in public because they're tired of explaining that their 1,500-year-old contemplative tradition has nothing to do with what people think it does. This is one of the most persistent misunderstandings in modern spirituality. And here's what's fascinating about it. Understanding what Buddhist Tantra actually teaches doesn't just correct a misconception. It reveals something profound about how consciousness itself works. Tonight, we're getting to the bottom of this. How did we get it so wrong? What does it actually teach? And why might it be the most relevant spiritual approach for our time? Because once you understand real Vajrayana Buddhism, everything else about the tradition suddenly clicks into place. Let me clear this up right away. Buddhist Tantra is not about sex. Now, I need to be precise here. In the highest levels of practice, symbolic sexual imagery does appear in texts and visualizations, very rarely. Advanced practitioners bound by sacred vows may engage in actual union practices, but only after decades of preparation and within strict ceremonial contexts. For 99% of practitioners, these elements remain purely symbolic, representing the union of wisdom and compassion, method and result. But that's not what created the confusion. Here's what actually happened. In 1828, a British civil servant named Brian Hodgson was stationed in Nepal. He discovered Sanskrit manuscripts, some labeled Hindu Tantra, containing sexual practices. Others labeled Buddhist Tantra, containing meditation instructions. Hodgson made a logical but catastrophic assumption. Same word, must be same thing. He was wrong. But his translations became the foundation for every Western book about Tantra. Then the 1960s happened, and authors like Omar Garrison took this colonial confusion and supercharged it with sexual revolution ideology. Publishers discovered that books promising sacred sex sold 10 times better than books about meditation. The market was flooded with tantric manuals that had zero connection to Buddhist practice. Here's the irony. While we were turning Buddhist Tantra into relationship advice, the actual practitioners in Tibet were being persecuted for preserving these very traditions. So what is Buddhist Tantra actually about? The word comes from Sanskrit meaning to weave, like threads in a tapestry. In Tibetan, gyu, meaning continuum. It refers to the unbroken stream of awareness flowing from ordinary confusion to complete awakening. Now, to understand how revolutionary this approach is, we need to see where it fits in Buddhism's historical development. Buddhist Tantra, or Vajrayāna, emerged in the 7th and 8th century India at places like Nalanda University, the greatest center of learning in the ancient world. This is where masters like Padmasambhava developed these sophisticated methods. Padmasambhava, who later brought Tantra to Tibet, was said to subdue demons not by destroying them, but by transforming them into protectors of the Dharma. That's the perfect metaphor for Tantra itself. It wasn't created in isolation. Vajrayāna grew out of Mahayana Buddhism, which itself built on the earlier Theravada foundation. But here's the key difference from other Buddhist approaches. While Theravada emphasizes renunciation and discipline, eliminate desires and attachments, while Mahayana emphasizes compassion and the Bodhisattva ideal, save all beings through gradual cultivation, Vajrayāna takes a completely different approach, transformation. Use everything as fuel for awakening. Your anger isn't eliminated, it becomes fierce compassion. Your desire isn't suppressed, it becomes wisdom that sees the empty nature of all phenomena. Your confusion isn't gradually overcome, it becomes spacious awareness. It's like the difference between throwing away coal and recognizing that coal and diamond are the same carbon, just organized differently. The Tibetan term is Vajrayāna, the diamond vehicle. The Vajra represents indestructibility and lightning-fast realization. Traditional Buddhism teaches gradual progress over many lifetimes. Tantra claims you can achieve complete enlightenment in this very life, under the right conditions, training, and guidance. But here's the catch, and this is crucial. You cannot practice authentic Tantra without meeting 3 absolute prerequisites. First, genuine renunciation, deep understanding that ordinary pleasure-seeking leads to suffering. Second, bodhicitta, unconditional compassion for all beings. Third, correct understanding of emptiness, direct insight into the empty nature of phenomena. Without renunciation, bodhicitta, and right view, Tantra collapses into ritualism, or worse, spiritual materialism. Then comes empowerment, Wang in Tibetan, where a qualified master determines if you have sufficient foundation and transmits authorization to practice. Breaking the sacred commitments that come with empowerment can, as the tradition says, turn medicine into poison. That's why authentic Tantric Buddhism has always been protected by secrecy, not from elitism, but because the techniques are powerful enough to destabilize an unprepared mind. So what do these authentic methods actually involve? Now we get to what Tantric practice actually looks like. But first, let me give you the clearest way to understand what makes Vajrayana unique. Remember our video on Zen Buddhism? Zen works by emptying the mind, no mind, pure awareness without content. Tantra works by filling the mind with divine form, then using that fullness to transcend ordinary perception entirely. It's like the difference between achieving silence by removing all sound, versus achieving silence by orchestrating sounds so perfectly they resolve into harmony. Both reach the same destination, but through completely opposite methods. This is why Vajrayana is called the path of transformation, while other approaches are paths of elimination. The core method is called Deity Yoga, and it's unlike anything else in human spiritual history. Instead of meditating on emptiness or developing loving kindness, you systematically dissolve your ordinary identity and reconstruct yourself as a fully enlightened Buddha. Not metaphorically, not as inspiration. You generate a complete sensory experience of being an awakened being. Let me walk you through this. Traditional practice begins with what's called the generation stage. You visualize yourself transforming into a specific Buddha form, complete with different body, different emotional qualities, different way of perceiving reality. Take Tara, the female Buddha of compassion. When practicing Tara Yoga, you don't fantasize a deity. You install a precise blueprint until your ordinary identity has nowhere left to land. Her green color represents active compassion. Her posture shows readiness to help. Her right hand in giving gesture, left hand holding a lotus representing purity, arising from ordinary experience. You think her thoughts of unlimited love. You feel her fearless confidence. You see through her awakened eyes that perceive the empty yet vivid nature of all phenomena. But here's what makes this different from fantasy. Traditional texts emphasize that what you're generating has no more solid existence than your ordinary identity. Both are empty appearances, equally real and equally groundless. The practice works by using emptiness to transcend the illusion of fixed selfhood. Let me pause here for a moment, because this might sound either impossible or like elaborate make-believe. But here's a concrete example of how this transformation actually works. Imagine you're someone who struggles with chronic anger. In conventional therapy, you might work on anger management, breathing techniques, cognitive restructuring. In Vajrayana practice, you might be given a kala, the wrathful Buddha whose fierce appearance represents compassion's power to cut through ignorance. Instead of suppressing your anger, you transform into a kala, experiencing that same fiery energy as protective wisdom that destroys obstacles to awakening. The anger doesn't disappear, it becomes fuel for fierce compassion that benefits all beings. Advanced practitioners report that after years of deity practice, the boundary between ordinary self and enlightened deity completely dissolves. They don't switch between identities, they recognize that identity itself is fluid, creative, infinitely malleable. Then comes completion stage practice, where you work directly with subtle energy channels and mental factors to achieve the transformation that visualization represents. This connects to fascinating research in modern psychology and neuroscience. Scientists at Stanford found that people who embody different avatars in virtual reality, even for short periods, show lasting changes in self-concept and behavior. They're essentially discovering digital deity yoga. Dr. Michael Mrazek at UC Santa Barbara demonstrated that intensive visualization training literally rewires brain structure, creating new neural pathways and strengthening connections between regions associated with attention and emotional regulation. The difference is that VR uses external technology, while Tantra uses the mind's own capacity for creating complete experiential realities. Now, you might be wondering about those wrathful images you've seen in Tibetan Buddhist art, the fierce deities with multiple arms and flaming hair. These aren't demons or frightening spirits. They represent the fierce aspect of compassion that cuts through delusion and protects wisdom. The wrathful appearance symbolizes the intensity required to transform deep-rooted patterns of suffering. What they discovered, and what modern research is beginning to confirm, is that human consciousness is far more creative and transformable than we typically assume. We think of our personality, our emotional patterns, our sense of what's possible, as relatively fixed. Tantra suggests that all of this is actually consciousness temporarily organized in particular configurations, and consciousness can be reorganized. The specific visualizations and energy practices remain within traditional lineages for good reasons, but the fundamental insight is available to anyone. Who you take yourself to be is not nearly as solid or permanent as it appears, and recognizing that fact experientially rather than just intellectually can change everything about how you relate to your life. Now here's where this ancient wisdom becomes surprisingly relevant to our modern world. Here's what might surprise you. Tantric principles are already transforming the modern world, often without anyone realizing where they came from. Carl Jung's work with active imagination, direct parallel to deity yoga methodology, visualization therapy for trauma recovery, adapted from Tibetan healing practices. Even virtual reality applications follow consciousness transformation principles that Vajrayana masters mapped centuries ago. But there's a problem. We're making the same mistake colonial scholars made 150 years ago, taking sophisticated technologies out of their wisdom context and wondering why they sometimes cause more problems than they solve. Popular adaptations often keep the power but remove the safeguards. Framework turns techniques into a path. Several high-profile Buddhist teachers have used tantric authority to justify sexual relationships with students, financial exploitation, psychological manipulation. These scandals didn't happen because Tantra is inherently corrupt, but because powerful techniques without wisdom safeguards create opportunities for abuse. Traditional Tibetan Buddhism has multiple safety mechanisms: monastic oversight, transparent lineage documentation, peer review among scholars, Western adaptations often strip away these protections while keeping the powerful techniques. Here's what authentic teachers consistently emphasize. Real empowerment makes you more autonomous, not more dependent. Genuine practice develops critical thinking alongside devotion. True transmission is verifiable through multiple independent sources. Authentic methods strengthen your ability to trust your own wisdom. But here's what's really at stake. We're living through an unprecedented moment. Traditional wisdom traditions are meeting modern science in ways that could accelerate human development or create new forms of confusion. Research into AI, brain-computer interfaces, and psychedelics is rediscovering questions about consciousness and identity that contemplatives have investigated for millennia. The choices we make about integrating ancient wisdom with modern capabilities will shape human civilization. If we get it right, we could see an explosion of human potential. If we get it wrong, we could create technological dependence that makes current problems seem simple. The Tibetan teachers who preserved tantric lineages through cultural destruction and political oppression did so because they understood these stakes. They weren't protecting archaic traditions, they were safeguarding technologies for consciousness transformation that humanity needs. As Mingyur Rinpoche puts it, modern science is rediscovering capacities that contemplatives have explored for millennia, but capacity without wisdom is like nuclear energy without safety protocols. So what does all this mean for you personally? So here's what we've discovered. One of the biggest spiritual misunderstandings of our time happened through a perfect storm of colonial confusion, sexual revolution ideology, and commercial spirituality. But underneath the confusion lies something extraordinary. Buddhist Tantra represents one of humanity's most sophisticated approaches to consciousness transformation, not through eliminating parts of human experience, but through recognizing that everything we experience, including what we take to be our fixed identity, is actually creative awareness temporarily organized in particular patterns. And creative awareness can reorganize itself. These methods can open extraordinary possibilities when approached with preparation, guidance, and patience. Now, if this exploration has sparked genuine interest, you should know that authentic Vajrayana practice continues today through four main Tibetan lineages: Gelug, Kagyu, Nyingma, and Sakya. Each maintains authentic empowerment lineages and training programs, but it requires approaching these teachings with the respect and commitment they deserve, not as quick fixes or weekend experiences, but as technologies for fundamental transformation that have been refined over centuries. The specific methods remain within traditional lineages for good reasons. They require proper preparation, qualified guidance, and wisdom frameworks that ensure transformation serves genuine awakening rather than ego enhancement. But the fundamental insight is available to anyone willing to investigate who you think you are, how you experience reality, what seems possible for your life. All of this is far more changeable than you've been taught to believe. The question isn't whether transformation is possible. Modern neuroscience and traditional contemplative reports both confirm that it is. The question is whether you're curious enough to explore what you actually are beneath everything you think you know about yourself. Your consciousness is not separate from the creative intelligence that organizes the universe. Discovering what that actually means, experientially rather than just intellectually, might be the most important investigation you ever undertake. And now you know why that Amazon bookshelf, filled with tantric sex manuals, where authentic Buddhist wisdom should be, represents one of the greatest spiritual scandals of our time. The real teachings were always there, waiting beneath the confusion. Are you ready to find them? If this video sparked genuine interest in authentic Buddhist Tantra, seek out established centers from these 4 Tibetan lineages with verifiable connections to qualified teachers. University Buddhist studies programs also offer scholarly approaches to these traditions. Drop a comment sharing what surprised you most about the real story, and subscribe for more investigations into Buddhism's most profound teachings. Remember, the most extraordinary human possibilities often hide beneath our biggest misconceptions. Stay curious and stay discerning.